Well, there we go. We'll end that on a positive note. So there we go. So we this week I decided let's like branch out and live outside of the box a little bit. So I am without a source sheet, which is my usual way to go. I love a good source sheet. But this week I thought we would take a little bit of a different direction and look at something that's very much been in the news, which is comes up every year. Although I've seen a lot about it this year. Christian Passover Seders. I'm gonna look at Wendy's face. Do people give me a sense? Is this a foreign concept to you? Do you know a little bit about this?
Well, I know that they've been doing it for a number of years, quite a number of years. But, I
had a coworker invite me to one years ago, but they called them a mock Seder. And I said, what are you mocking?
That's a good question. So we're going to look at this and we're going to understand where it comes from, where this idea comes from to have a Passover Seder among Christians. And then what does that mean, right? Where are the boundaries of respecting traditions and appropriating traditions? So we talk about appropriation as a big buzzword at this point, and it's when you take someone else's tradition, someone else's culture, and adopt it as your own without attributing it to them. I got stuck on my words here. It's only noon. I'm not poised well for the rest of the day if we're already getting stuck on words. So we'll all hang in there. So that's what we're going to look at today. And even though it's sort of a weird topic, we are learning and we are studying and we are engaging with our world and our tradition. So we offer our blessing for Torah study. We say Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So let's create a foundation of what we know about this custom. We're talking, for those who just popped in here, we are talking about Christian Passover Seders. So what do we know? Let's see what collectively, between the however many faces we have on this screen, know. What do you know about Christian Passover Seders, if anything?
Well, the Last Supper was supposedly a Seder.
Okay, we're going to talk about that a whole lot more. Susan, was there a hand over there?
Yes, I have done a Christian Seder at St. Mary's Academy when our sons were there, and they were extremely respectful of what we believed, other than they used a lot of flowers and a lot of candles. Okay. Which I then told them, the flowers are good, but the candles,
All right. A lot of flowers, a lot of candles. Anything else we know about Christian Passover Seders?
I know that they buy things retail. They don't know about wholesale. Little joke there, everyone smile. Thank you, Arnold. You always get it.
Well, you only need an audience of one. You need one good laugh. Hey, Arnold's granddaughter is often my good audience. She tells me every time I see her, my Zadie comes to all your meetings, she says. My Zadie goes to all your meetings.
My name, number one audience is Arnold.
There you go. You got it good. It's as my dad always says when he says something ridiculous that only my mother laughs at and none of us. He says, I don't work for you. I work for her. I don't work for you. I work for her. That's all you need. So I've got a bunch of articles pulled that we can sort of look at in pieces. And I thought maybe a good place to start is in understanding these Seders. And there's a really wonderful article. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal to get it for us. So I'm going to remember to not say subscribe or to stay subscribed forever. This comes from Danya Ruttenberg, who's a really wonderful rabbi. She's really interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen any of her stuff, but highly recommend her. She has a book that's on my shelf I'm looking at called Surprised by God. It says it right here. She's really, really a pretty interesting rabbi, an interesting woman, a really wonderful writer, and has a lot to say. So this came out a couple years ago. So we're looking at Passover, and she's identifying 5 myths about Passover. So we're going to only look at a couple of them. So the Seder is a purely Jewish tradition. She says this is a myth. Why is this a myth? The Torah tells us, so what do we get from the Torah about Passover? Clear out the leaven for the week of Passover, slaughter paschal lamb, matzah bitter herbs, teach the story to our children. A lot of what we get out of Passover is Mishnah and Talmud, right? as much of our tradition is, right? We add and we add and we add. But think about the time in which the Mishnah and the Talmud are written, right? We are all influenced by our time and the cultures that we live in. And so what is this piece here? Does someone want to read this one paragraph right here that I've highlighted? Anyone? All right, I'll read. In fact, many scholars today argue that the Seder is based on the Greco-Roman model of the symposium, which involved, among other things that may sound familiar to anyone celebrating Passover, a banquet framed by specific appetizers, eating in a reclined position, drinking a predetermined number of cups of wine, songs of praise, easily accessible questions, and a deep discussion of philosophical matters that sometimes lasted all night. Sound familiar? Sounds like a good Seder to me, right?
Yeah, maybe we got it from that.
So it's reasonable. We can, through all of Jewish context, look at the way that the adjacent cultures and communal experiences impact what we then create as Jewish, right? So very few things are created, if anything, created in a vacuum, right? We're all a product of our times and our experiences. And so how can we look at what exists in that time to understand? So as we look at trying to understand our own creation story from the Torah, one of the ways we do that is we look at other ancient Near Eastern creation myths. There are many other ancient Near Eastern creation stories that have clearly had impact on the way our stories go, right? There are a lot of crossovers and a lot of comparisons. And so it doesn't mean that, Judaism isn't unique. What makes anything unique is the way that those pieces come together. So great comparison is Israeli food. Big challenge in defining what Israeli food is. What's Israeli food? How would you define Israeli food?
Middle Eastern.
Middle Eastern, right? So that doesesn't make it Israeli anymore. Now we've just got a region of food. But Israelis might fight you on that. Has anybody seen on Netflix the documentary In Search of Israeli Cuisine? It's very good. Wendy's seen it. It's very, very good. You should all go watch it like 10 minutes ago. Very, very good. In Search of Israeli Cuisine, it's with Michael Solomonov, who's a chef out of Philly with some really incredible restaurants. He's also written 2 very popular cookbooks, Zahav and Israeli Soul. They're very good. Highly recommend. And the challenge of defining what Israeli food is that it has no definition, right? Is falafel Israeli? No, other places have falafel. Hummus, you got a whole fight over hummus, right? There's so many pieces. There was a project some number of years ago to determine what was uniquely Israeli, what foods were uniquely Israeli. And I think the determination was the chocolate milk in a bag and maybe bamba. I think a crembo was in crembo. Does anybody know what crembo is? It's like not a great Passover conversation, but it's a cookie with a marshmallow piped on top and then dipped in chocolate. It's not bad. Not bad. So there's very little that's uniquely Israeli. So what makes Israeli food? Israeli food is defined by the way that these not so unique pieces are put together, right? So Israeli food's a little different from maybe some other Middle Eastern food because we have kashrut restrictions and requirements, although halal and kashrut are very similar. There are a lot of overlaps. Israeli food is unique because there's a lot of Russian influence, so many Russian immigrants to Israel, right? It impacts the way that the other Middle Eastern staples look, right? You start to have more influences. We have a lot of Northern African influences like Morocco and Tunisia. All of those food cultures put a stamp on the food, right? Americans coming to Israel, bringing some of their food pieces of what they knew from American life. Israeli food is unique, not because of the food, but in the way that the foods come together, right? From all of these different places and the way that other influences sort of externally have had their impact and made their mark on Israeli food and come together in Israel. So there are many instances in Jewish tradition where maybe perhaps what we have is not completely unique, as in it was created out of someone's mind, right? So like Harry Potter, when Harry Potter was created, that was pretty unique. We weren't really talking about, there wasn't so much in the fantasy space in that same way in a mainstream population, right? It started all kinds of new conversations. It was pretty unique. Like it came out of nowhere a little bit, right? In terms of mainstream culture and not sort of side pieces. Not everything in Judaism is unique in that way. It's often a bit of a mishmash of influences from the cultures that were impacting these rabbis as they're creating Judaism. Fair? Makes sense? Comments, questions, rebuttals? Thoughts? Okay. So if we already understand the Seder to be not a purely uniquely Jewish invention, right? I'll put the article we're looking at for those who are just joining us. I'll put the article that we just looked at here in the chat. And we're looking at these 5 myths, and we were on myth number 2, looking at the overlap with the Greco-Roman symposium with the Seder. So, okay, the Seder is not completely uniquely invented out of Jewish minds. It's based on something that we're getting from somewhere else. Okay. The next paragraph on there, I'll put this back on the screen, that Rabbi Ruttenberg shares. Of course, the real power of the Seder is in how it sacralized and transformed the symposium model, right? So now she's identifying what is unique about the Seder. Right? Praise was sung not to the emperor, as a symposium was, but to God. Questions were not about the nature of food or pleasure, but rather an invitation to discuss essential themes of bondage and freedom. The cups of wine alluded to the 4 actions taken by God in redeeming the Israelites, or the 4 stages of liberation. Children and women were included. The Seder may have been adapted from the wider culture, but it was imbued with enduring meaning. I love the way she explains it. It's far more eloquently than what I had this morning. The Seder may have been adapted from the wider culture, but it was imbued with enduring meaning. Okay. So as we look at how we're talking, our main theme for today is about Christian Passover Seders. That's what we're looking at. So we're seeking to understand that practice. So if we're going to understand the Seder, it's not purely Jewish, without any other influences in its origin. Important piece. We'll come back to myth 3. I want to skip for a second because this is such an important one that I don't think we all really realize. The Seder centers on asking and answering 4 questions. Right? The 4 questions, I think most of us would probably say, yeah, a huge part of the Seder. If someone says to you, explain the Passover Seder to me. Tell me about a Passover Seder. One of the things I'd be willing to bet we would all say is there are these 4 questions and the youngest kid at the table says the 4 questions, right? It's a pretty staple part of the Seder experience, right? And while everybody has different traditions about who says it and how you say it, 4 questions. So we think at Passover that we ask 4 questions. And this is so good because sometimes we get a narrative in our head and we miss that we've created something that's not really there. So let's look. Many Jews learn the 4 questions when we were kids to recite them by heart to a familiar tune. The questions formally kick off the retelling of the story of Exodus. They're often considered the heart of the service. Someone want to read this paragraph? I'm so sick of my own voice already, and we've got more time together today.
I'll read. But if you look carefully at the Haggadah, there's actually only one question. Why is this night different from all other nights? Following this are 4 observations about the food and the practices that distinguish the evening from others. In the Haggadah, only 2 of the observations about eating matzah and bitter herbs are addressed directly, and not until much later in the Seder. Rather, the frame of the questioning is intended to point us to the discursive nature of the Haggadah. It's not meant to be recited rote, but rather engaged as part of a dynamic discussion with the people at the table fleshing out what the text leaves unsaid and with multiple right answers to every question out there.
Thoughts on that piece? Because I think it's kind of brilliant. We're not asking 4 questions. What are we doing?
Engaging.
We're asking how many questions?
1.
We ask 1 question. We cite 4 examples, and only 2 of them are ever addressed. it's not, it's asking one question, which is so not how we frame it. I love when someone challenges what we just sort of accept to be the case, which is what I see having happened here, right? She's challenging. It's not 4 questions. Look again, look closer. The Haggadah, my parents have created a Haggadah over the years. It's a collection of other different ones, but it's based out of what was the UAHC Children's Haggadah, which I know many people use. I don't know if people are familiar with it, but at the top, it lists the one question with the question mark and then the 4 pieces below. And so that framing sort of helps you visually see that it's only one question. But usually I've got our Haggadah sitting here that we use at Sinai. I'll put it up. Most Haggadot frame them the 4 questions, right? Just right in order down the line. And you can't see it probably. There's only one question mark. Look here. One question mark after the first piece. And then we've got a bunch of periods on these statements. On all other nights, we do this. Tonight, we do this, period. We don't ask 4 questions, right? So how does this start to play in? We're going to look. We're starting to deconstruct a little bit of what we know to be absolutely true about Passover to start to see how this comes to be. This is the fact that a child is asking helps us to fulfill the commandment of teaching the story to our children. But if we want more questions, we need to generate them ourselves, which is a lovely idea. This part is less directly related to the Christian Passover Seders, but I really love it. And so we're looking at it. So this is really one of the big sticking points of creating a Passover Seder, a Christian Passover Seder. It's the idea that the Last Supper, right? We've got famous painting of it, was a Passover Seder. So the Gospels tell us that it took place on the first night of Passover. But let's look at the problem with that here. However, it's pretty unlikely that Jesus participated in a Seder. Lori, will you keep reading here at when?
Sure. When the second temple in Jerusalem stood, the first night of Passover usually involved just eating the Paschal sacrifice, a lamb that had been slaughtered at the temple and then roasted and served at home. The temple was destroyed several decades after Jesus' death. There are no descriptions of the Seder or the Haggadah, the text that guides the Seder ritual now, from major historical authors or works detailing Passover observance during the time of the Second Temple, such as Philo of Alexandria, Josephus, or the Book of Jubilees, or the Elephantine Passover Papyrus. We first see mention of them in early rabbinic texts like the Mishnah and the Tosefta, which can be tricky to date as they originated as oral traditions. Parts of the Seder might have begun to take root during Jesus' lifetime, but there's no evidence that they were widespread or developed enough that he would have participated in them. Interesting.
Right. So this is her refuting this idea. The other piece that often comes up about the rationale that the Last Supper was in fact a Seder comes from the idea that there were prayers associated and that they said specific prayers over the food as a part of the meal. What do you think that could be other than a Passover Seder? That they closed with prayers.
Any meal.
Any meal. Why? Because what do we end a meal with?
Benching.
Exactly. Benching. Birkat Hamazon, our prayers thanking God for the food that we've just eaten. So that's just evidence that this was a Jewish meal, which it was at that point in time, right? Christianity is still in like baby stages of being a sect. They aren't a religion yet. They're a Jewish sect. Sectarianism was a huge part of how Judaism functioned at that point in time, right? All of these different sects of Jewish life, and that's all it was at that point. So this was a Jewish dinner.
I was always confused because you see them eating like leavened bread. So why would you be eating, like if you see a picture, they have like this big fluffy piece of bread they're breaking.
Wait, I'm looking for it. I've got hold on.
And a sacrificial pig.
Yes, there are often pigs. Hold on.
You didn't have to be Jewish to enjoy Levi's bread.
I'm trying to find this. Oh, here we go. here's the article I'm looking for. This is an article that, wait, it's loading. I read this week. This came out this week. Christian Passover Seder with cross-shaped challah sparks online rage. What a headline. Can you see this challah?
Yeah.
It's braided into the shape of a cross, which is so funny. Like there's so many layers on this, right?
So it's probably not really a challah because they didn't do the blessing, I bet, when they they didn't take it when they baked it.
So that one starts to get complicated because that one becomes, so not everyone does that hafrasat challah, right? Where you separate out a piece of challah. That is actually in some iterations is almost like sort of like a messianic tradition that has not necessarily been by everyone. So you can make, in my view of the world, you can make a challah that is kosher and ready to go and Shabbat approved without separating the challah. That some of the other origins for that tradition are that it's a repayment for the sins of Eve, right? Because in the end, it's all the women's fault, right? It's always the women's fault. The women always screw it all up. Don't we know?
I think I'll quit doing it then.
Rabbi Jordy.
Yes.
Did you ever bake a challah like that?
Oh, in a cross? I haven't. Although ironically, one of the ways to get some of the fancy rounded braids around the high holy days is to braid it into that plus sign. It's a plus sign, not a cross. To braid it into a plus sign, and then you tuck it under to make it round. So it's one of the way to do it. But just on the challah piece, it's often seen as some people burn that extra piece of challah as an offering, which is like very much temple times related, which to me is hard to separate from messianic practices. And it's about like an offering for what in repayment for all of for the sin that Eve committed that we're all still paying for. So what I started to do once I started to understand the tradition better, it didn't really sit with me. So I was talking about this with Natalie. We were talking about this like 2 weeks ago. I take the little ends that I cut off of my challah as I'm braiding, I end up cutting some pieces. Whatever I have left over, I smush it into like a pancake. I put it in a frying pan with nothing in it, just put the heat on. And I do it on both sides. It puffs up.
With tortilla.
And yeah, it's a little thicker than a tortilla.
Like a pita.
Yeah, kind of like a pita. It puffs on both sides. I cut it in half and I share it with Matthew. I sometimes deliver it to his office or he'll come down. And it's become our challah. It's our challah cake, challah pancake. And that is our Friday afternoon tradition. It's how we know Shabbat's coming. You get this little taste of Shabbat before your challah is ready. That feels like Shabbat's coming. And so it's become a really beautiful thing in our house that we really love. But that's, isn't this the essence of what we're doing in Reform Judaism, right? We're looking at these pieces that have either been passed to us or we feel like we're supposed to do, or we know that that's how you do it. And we turn them and we think about them and we're critical about them and decide, is this the right practice for me or is it not? And you can decide it's the right practice for you, or you can decide, I think it's not quite. So how could I reimagine this? So there you go. There's my challah tangent here. But yes, there's that. There was a friend of mine dawned on me the 4 questions end with halayla hazeh, not ma halayla hazeh. On this night we blank. Why not? Why on this night we blank? Yes, absolutely. That's because they aren't questions. They aren't 4 questions. It's one question with 4 examples. It's exactly what it is.
Just hit me that that's how it's read.
Yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine sent this from a store yesterday. I'll show you this picture if we're going back to challah.
Easter bread.
Looks a lot like a challah, huh?
Yeah.
Right. And so, partly we've got, every culture has breads and there's in every culture, let me back up. What foods can exist becomes narrow at some point, right? And so, there's not that much difference between challah and brioche. It's a little bit of milk and butter, right? Is the difference between challah and brioche. None of these things are terribly far apart from each other. And this is actually a brioche, technically, because it has milk and it has butter in it, which makes it an enriched dough, which makes it a brioche and not a challah. Challah is defined as an egg bread that is not an enriched dough.
Rabbi Jordy,
Yes.
when we lived in New York on Long Island, our neighbor worked at a bakery, and the first Passover that she was working there, they put out an ad, "Get your challahs for Passover," you know? And we had to inform her that you must have a lot of challahs left over.
It's so funny. I was just talking about that with my mom yesterday because I'd seen this picture going around from a Trader Joe's. It was going around in a rabbi Facebook group. So Trader Joe's, alas, as we're loyal, even though. And they, it was a sign that Trader Joe's sells challah, and it was this little sign, like they put on little added stickers and things that say like perfect for this, perfect for this, it's perfect for Passover on the challah. Or like at Hanukkah, there are always some that go around. It's like a big thing of ham, right? It says great for Hanukkah. Ham isn't great for any Jewish holiday, to my understanding. My mom, we were talking about yesterday, she said her all-time favorite is when they put out the Hanukkah candles for Passover. It's very much like I don't understand your weird customs, so we're going to put out anything we can think of, right?
Or I like it at the grocery stores around here, they always have a Passover section, but nothing is ever kosher for Passover.
I know. Well, and that's one of the great confusions for many, that you can have matzah that's not kosher for Passover is very upsetting to people. And it's hard when a grocery store gets a shipment, you buy your matzah and you don't always check. And then people get home and say, it's not kosher for Passover. What do I do with this? All that means is that the kosher for Passover matzah is a sped up time process that has to be done within 18 minutes. And so the non-kosher for Passover matzah typically just wasn't done quite to that time frame. What it is. So the world doesn't end, if you eat non-kosher for non-kosher for Passover matzah. I said non-kosher pasta is what I started to say. Put them together. That's not what we're talking about. That's something different. Excuse me. So, we see that these customs are happening. I'm going to pull up some Christian resources for us to look at what people are actually using. So there's a couple of really interesting pieces here. Hold on, let me get the right slide, the right screen up. Oh, not that. Okay. Share screen. Here we go. Okay. So we're going to start reading this about the story of Passover. This comes from a Christian resource. Passover is the oldest and most important of Jewish religious festivals, commemorating God's deliverance of the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt and his creation of the Israelite people. Okay, not bad. We're now going to quote Exodus. Not bad, right? Term Passover refers to the 10th and final plague God brought from the Egypts upon the Egyptians to persuade Pharaoh to let the people go, the death of the firstborn, in obedience to God's instructions. Those who believed placed the blood of a lamb on the doorposts of their homes, that God would pass over those homes. While thoroughly based in these historical events, the celebration encompasses much more, as it becomes a vehicle to celebrate the very nature of God and his gracious work in the world. Here it is. Here comes the Jesus. It is in this larger dimension that Jesus adopted the Passover service as a sacramental remembrance of God's new work of deliverance in the Christ, and allows Christians to celebrate this ancient festival. Okay. So these are extensive resources I found this week, including this is also this site, and there's many sites like this. I mean, it's explaining in great detail. Look at all this scrolling. How to have a Passover Seder. One of the things that was interesting to me is that it was oddly specific. Hold on, I'm scrolling down to it.
While you're scrolling away, that one word that caught me on this was allowed, that Christians are allowed to celebrate this. It's like if they weren't allowed, they'd go to hell or something. And as a former one of them, you didn't question anything the priest told you. You never questioned it, or you're going straight to hell.
So what's interesting, absolutely. What's interesting, one of the things I love about Passover is how different everyone's Passover Seder looks, right? You go to someone else's house, it looks different. Everybody's got their Passover traditions and the things that make it your Seder. And this is so specific, which is so fascinating to me. The head table should be large enough to seat 3 to 4 people, the 2 main leaders, 1 man and 1 woman, and 1 designated to lead the people readings. It should be able to hold all the elements of the Seder without being crowded. Usually a 6 to 8 foot folding table is best. I mean, look at the detail we're into, like the length of a folding table needs to be this U, there needs to be a head table. And then look at this place setting. A very specific place setting later on in here. It dictates which is white, like a white tablecloth. And later, I think it says purple napkins somewhere. It was specific on the colors of things. I mean, look at this detail. Cloth napkins as opposed to something else. I mean, it's a lot of detail that they're going into on how to do this right. And one of the things that's so interesting in contrast to me, contrasting it to our Seders, is that a Jewish Passover Seder looks really different by household. Even as you start to get into ultra-Orthodox, there's still some variation, right? There's room for customizing and for understanding it in different ways. And if the goal of Passover is to feel that you yourself were taken out of Egypt and to teach it to the next generation, which are really 2 of the big goals of Passover, then we're leaving room to be able to do that in different ways, right? Not everyone is going to connect. I'm just plugging my computer in. Not everyone can connect to the Passover Seder in the same exact way. It was interesting to me that it was such a big difference here.
Well, even from year to year, it's different in our
Of
house.
course.
I mean, depending on the ages of the children or,
Yes.
what else is going on.
So here's Arnold. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question. You started off by saying that there were infuriating responses to the Christian Seder. Why?
People upset about a Christian Seder?
Are they mocking it? Or are they saying this is a wonderful time? Relieves the history of, and frankly, as far as I'm concerned, when I came to Mobile, very small Jewish community, I used to hold a Seder for all the Christians in my residence and everything else. I wanted the mystique out of it taken out. In the back of my mind, I still keep thinking of the blood libel, which was built on secrecy. There's nothing secret about a Seder. And that to me, it's not even, in truth, there are prayers in it, but they're not mocking it. They're just taking the custom and making it fitting to their doctrine. I think that's wonderful.
I think we're going to talk more about that as we go. I would challenge, I think that what you did is different, right? I want to distinguish the Seder that you held for Christian friends as different from Christians holding a Christian Seder that's about Jesus. Right? I think that those are 2 different things, right? I think that what you did is actually very much in line, certainly very much in line with Passover, right? About inviting people to your table, right? Let all who are hungry come and eat. So that's hungry for food, but that's hungry for knowledge, hungry to understand something different, right? My parents' Passover table, I'll tell you, I have adopted uncles. I've got a lot of adopted family. They're very much my uncles. We have no blood relation. And they aren't Jewish. And it has become so the case that to have a Passover without them feels like not a Passover, right? And it's a very meaningful to them. They love being a part of it. But I think it's different to have Christians at your Seder table at a Jewish Seder than to have a Christian Seder. Why? Because if having Christians at the table, they're participating and celebrating in this Jewish ritual. A Christian Seder is making a Christian ritual.
And?
I think they're different. And so,
but what's wrong with them making a ritual?
So the question
is to their needs. I think it's a wonderful custom. And why are we trying to guard? There's nothing mystical about this. The truth is, when I go to a Seder now, compared to what I was raised with, this was like every time I go to a Seder now, it's like walking into a church compared to what I knew. So it's a ritual, it's a custom, and it's designed to relive a time, and then lessons evolve from it. That's all. I mean, I don't know.
That's what it is. And for us, but Christians appropriate it. And I think maybe they're worried because this has happened to me. is that somebody say, oh yeah, we had a Passover Seder at our church. And then they would come up and say, okay, so you Jews, it's always you Jews, don't believe in Jesus, then how come you have a Seder? So it's the misinformation that happens that I think we object to.
So Lewis says to him, it feels like a hijack of the original meaning. I want to read a little piece of this Haggadah. We're gonna keep looking at this and start to process this, because it's a good question. It's a really good question you've raised. So here's what this Seder says in the introduction. For the sake of completeness, I must emphasize that whether or not a family does a Seder at Passover in their home, their standing before the Lord is unaffected. We are saved by grace alone, through Christ alone, for the glory of God alone. We enjoy celebrating the Passover Seder for its lessons of God's sovereignty and grace in the lives of his children, to come and to see the marvelous revelation of Jesus Christ at the coming of the Messiah, our Redeemer, in the ritual items used in the Seder. We pray that you will be blessed as you explore this annual festival, and we also pray for Jesus Christ to reveal himself to you and your family this Passover season. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to show you one more piece here. This is from this same Haggadah, this Christian Haggadah, looking at this table of meaning, right? So on the Seder plate, what's on the Seder plate? Messianic meaning, so we see the bone as Jesus, the Lamb of God. The middle matzah, the afikomen, we break the middle matzah. In a Messianic, in this Christian meaning, it's Jesus Christ as being pierced and bruised on the cross, is this broken symbol. This one's hard for me. This one is hard for me.
They're doing the same thing with their adoption of the Seder as we did with our, as our, how we adopted the rituals that what's the word I want?
Gentiles?
No, the origins of so many of our festivals weren't religious. Pagan rituals.
Yes, they evolved into a Jewish ritual, but there's change and addition, and certainly, and you can make the argument that this is just one that's happening in our modern times as opposed to it happened before. Perhaps I'm going to share this up here. This is the very same meal that our Lord Jesus Christ celebrated with his disciples in the upper room the night he was betrayed. In this Seder meal, he revealed how the traditional ritual symbols pointed to him, the Messiah, instituting what we now call the Lord's Supper. The New Testament record of that night gives brief snapshots of the Passover Seder. Not every aspect of the Seder is seen in the New Testament record, but enough pieces of the puzzle are there to assure us that they indeed celebrated the Passover Seder together that night. This ritual meal had been celebrated for over 1,000 years, always pointing to the Messiah, and it was fulfilled that night in Jesus Christ. So here's what I think feels different to me than pagan appropriation of ritual. This is saying, here's your holiday and your festival. Here's the festival of Passover, but you're missing the last piece. You're missing the last piece, which is that there is a redemption, and the redemption is Jesus.
Plus, a lot of it is erroneous.
Say more.
Based on what the article said earlier about when the Passover meal was first celebrated, a lot of it is, the facts are erroneous, the historical facts.
Right. There isn't really strong evidence that it was a Passover Seder. Right, it's a bit of a weak linkage. They're saying there are enough pieces of the puzzle. I don't know that I would agree. How does this feel to you? What do you think about this? This is a big debate that happens always, but it's really come up this year a lot. I've seen in a lot of articles.
Well, they missed the big point with their white tablecloth and purple napkins. We start off with white tablecloth and white napkins, and then when we start pouring the wine, they turn purple.
I know, someone spills every year, always.
It's a miracle. Well, I've been to Seders where they invite a lot of people and they don't have enough of the same china pattern. And I thought it was kind of neat that it was all a mixed up mishmash of different patterns of china and silverware, glassware and stuff. I thought, well, this is cool because a lot of the china was passed down and some was just bought on sale the week before. It just was everything all mixed up. But, it was just, yeah. But then again, as Jews, we are all mixed up too. I mean, we're different everything. We all come from different families and things, but then we all get together for the Seder.
So
Yes.
I think that this is an article in the Forward in 2018 that I think is might be helpful sort of context here. But would this fall under cultural appropriation? The Cambridge English Dictionary defines the term as the act of taking or using things from a culture that is not your own, especially without showing that you understand or respect this culture. The difference between cultural appropriation and cultural exchange is a nuanced one. Our society requires cultural exchange to function. Is eating Asian fusion takeout or practicing westernized yoga sinful? I do both of those regularly. Who gets to litigate what constitutes theft and what constitutes appreciation? The Seder actually took a lot of its pomp and style from Greco-Roman tradition, where nobles lay on pillows eating and discussing philosophical matters. Jews mimicked the Greeks by reclining and discussing the Exodus. Yet, it's a lot like people doing a sweat lodge or a Sundance that are not Native American, an Episcopal priest told the religious news service. You're taking the benefits without having suffered. Underlying the idea of appropriation is the sense that something or someone is just there for the taking, a style of dress, a personal narrative, an entire continent, writes Ann Holmes. In this case, it seems to be Jewish culture, the narrative of Exodus no longer referring specifically to the enslaved Jews, but now a metaphor for the personal usage of anyone, anywhere. What is Jewish is now universal. Is this a good thing, a bad thing? Is the world now identifying with Jews, or is it simply choosing to erase them from their narrative? Thoughts? I think a really good question.
The latter.
You think the latter? You don't get to remute yourself. You got to say more.
Well, they're trying to make our beliefs invalid to add Jesus into the mix.
Okay. Other thoughts? How do you react to this? I mean, look what we learned about our Passover Seder, right? We didn't think it up out of nowhere. We pulled a lot of the pieces from somewhere else. And so is there a difference? And this is truly a question, not a question with a right answer or a pointed question. Is there a difference between what Christian Seders are doing with Jewish Seders compared to what Jewish Seders did with Greco-Roman symposiums?
Yes.
What's the difference for you?
Well, the difference is the Christian Seders are trying to make our beliefs invalid, that any religion that doesn't accept Jesus as the Son of God is not a valid religion.
Okay. So it feels like it's invalidating the Jewish experience of Passover to you.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that's again the being allowed thing, that you're allowed to, as a Christian, to celebrate a Seder and not be condemned forever because you're not becoming Jewish, which is a first-class ticket to hell. It's I grew up Catholic, and instead it's sorry, lost my train of thought, but they're doing it as a way to with the mind to conversion, where when Jews do it, it's because we were told to remember, and we're remembering. I brought to Sinai. Mike and I brought a lot, excuse me, of non-Jewish friends to our Seder, and it was just, again, I think Arnold said that it was to take away the mysticism about it, the secretiveness, what's the big secrets that we're hiding, in our Seder, and it's nothing. It's just kind of cold that time of year, and we keep the doors closed.
I do think that there is a really big distinction here that I would like to put forward. A distinction between a Christian Passover Seder with a Haggadah that's talking about Jesus and that being redemption, from inviting Christians to a Jewish Passover Seder. I think those are very, very different things. I think, and I'm not making a judgment call. I just would encourage us to distinguish between the two, because I think we're talking about something very different here. And I would offer one more piece, and then please keep talking. This is an article from an Episcopalian priest. And she's saying, I wonder though, how Christians would feel about Jews or Muslims having play Eucharists, dressing someone up like a priest and saying the words from the Book of the Common Prayer. And so she's regarding Passover. I think there's two ways to look at these Christian Seders. One as doing mock Seders versus having a Christian Seder. I think those are also two layers of this. Am I having a mock Seder and sort of mocking, not mocking like I'm making fun of, but taking on like a play version of this tradition, versus am I changing this tradition to be about Jesus? I think those are also two layers of the Christian Seder. But please, other thoughts, people, continue. What do you think?
Well, what if the Christian says, come over for our Easter celebration on Sunday? What do you say? Make sure you have a chicken. The ham is a centerpiece of the meal, and we would have to be. It's easy to go from Christian to a Seder than from a Seder to Easter dinner. Thank you, Louis.
Other thoughts? Yeah.
I think that number one, you have to know what part of Christianity you're talking about, because not all Christians do it the same way. There are so many different denominations within Christianity, from the super Orthodox to the liberal, and you've got to know where you're coming from. If we're not invited, what do we care? I mean, seriously, why do we care? I mean, we can take what we want from Christianity, and they certainly can take what they want from Judaism.
Well, I think that it's the misinformation about Jews, and that's what's caused a lot of our troubles over the years, is that, I don't know, it's just we if they start saying stuff about us and it's not true, that's just my personal opinion.
But I think you really need to know what denomination of Christianity you're talking about, because a Presbyterian would be different than a Methodist. A Methodist would be different than a Catholic. And it goes on and on and on. There's so many different parts to Christianity and how they're treated.
That's true, but the one thing in common is Jesus.
Well, that's the one thing in common.
And that is what has separated and caused a lot of problems for the Jewish people.
Well, absolutely. I mean, way back to the Pope. But
is that before Jesus?
No.
I agree with Susan. They are different. And half the time I can't tell one from the other, but there are some that if you do not go to their particular church, you're lost. And then there's the more liberal that, well, if you're a good person, it's okay.
Right.
Absolutely. Christianity is not monolithic at all, right? There's so many different kinds of Christians and denominations within Christianity. I will say that the practice of a Passover Seder is happening throughout many different denominations, not just in one. These Seders are done in a lot of different Christian spaces. And so we're talking about Christianity because it's happening within a lot of spaces within Christianity. We're not sort of using that as a blanket term unnecessarily, is what I would add.
But are they being done differently according to which group it is? Some groups are monolithic. Some groups believe in the Father, the Son, and I don't know who the third one is. You know, some groups just believe in different things. And some are liberal, the Catholics, there's liberals and there's quite conservatives. It depends on your belief and what you believe in. And are you supporting the Jews? Are you not supporting the Jews? I mean, it all is spread out all over a whole spectrum. And we have to understand that to discuss this, because we're discussing one aspect and not the whole bubble.
Who decides when it's enough of a problem that maybe we need to do something about it? And then
Well, if the Christians are invited to a Passover Seder, you have ultra, you have Orthodox, you have conservative, you have Reform, and they would get a different aspect of the Jewish Seders.
So, Rabbi, is there discussion, you know, with the rabbis about this being a problem? I mean, about we need to take on some education?
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are upset by this happening. I see you, Arnie, 1 second. There are a lot of people who are upset about this happening. I haven't seen sort of any sort of concerted effort to do much about it. I have seen a lot of, I spent a lot of time on this week, going down all kinds of rabbit holes. And I read a lot from Christians who are saying, don't do this, from Christian leaders who are saying, this isn't right. You'd be upset if another religion took on our traditions, right, and took them as their own. Don't do this to someone else. Arnie, yeah, go for it.
I'd just like to comment on Lori's question. When they come and tell me I'm doing my Seder wrong, that's the red line. They want to use it. Presume to hate. You know what I mean? What's the difference? Remember,
I agree with that rationale. Here's the challenge for me is how do you avoid getting to the place where someone says you're doing it wrong? Right. And so is this the precursor? Is this the appetizer to that being the main entree where someone tells you it there? So if I know that that's what's coming, I'm going to try and stop it at the appetizer course. Right. And so is this the lead up to that?
You know, historically, that would not be true. I mean, the basic, crevice that occurred is Jews did not accept Jesus. Okay. And you have in the population of Christians, you have a group that therefore feels, yeah, we better go out and kill them. Okay. I think that anything that in fact, that's what the whole Judeo-Christian dialogue is, and the trialogues, okay, is to try to make it so that there is no mystery, period. Okay, you want to proselytize us, gesundheit hate. But at the moment you pass a law that says, and they're not going to pass it Passover, they'll pass it like they've done historically. You're not allowed to have a Talmud in your house. Okay, you're not allowed to, stuff like that. That's why I'm saying I think this is much to do, and I think it's wonderful that they're borrowing, tradition. The Muslims,
it's hypocritical because you have 10 people killed in Boulder within 2 days. Every Christians, Jews, everyone's meeting. We get together. Why can't we just get together and eat the food?
It's I'll also add it's a couple pieces here. It's not just Passover Seders that this is happening with. There are growing Christian communities who are doing High Holy Day observances, who are doing all kinds of other Jewish observances. And many people are pointing out, you talked about the blood libel early on. People are drawing the linkage that there's something painful to go here. I'm reading a post that came out last year, to go from Jews use the blood of Christian kids in their matzah to actually the Seder is ours too, isn't respectful, it's laughable, it's dehumanizing, it's anti-Semitic, is one reflection. There are a lot of calls that this is anti-Semitic behavior. And concern about what happens if this continues. And, if every year there are more of these, then what comes from this and what happens next? Some aren't bothered by it, as it's clear that some of us here aren't bothered by it, and some are really bothered by it. this is, yet again, I always used to tell the kids, I used to staff Jewish trips all around the world, and that if I would tell them, if you leave feeling like it's all been wrapped up into this beautiful box with a really pretty bow on top, then I'm very sorry. I have done you a disservice and I haven't done my job. I think it's almost never the point to feel like everything's wrapped up neatly and I have a clear answer on how I feel about something. It's definitely not necessarily the Jewish answer. That's not really how we operate on things. We say, okay, let's keep turning it and turning it and turning it and turning it and seeing a different angle and finding new ideas and new ways to respond to it. And let me think about this and la'asok b'divrei Torah, engage in these words of Torah and really chew on it. So everyone who's looking at me with these sort of confused or thoughtful or frustrated faces, you're welcome. That's the goal. That's what we try and do here. That's what we try and push ourselves and challenge ourselves and think a little past what we were already thinking about when we woke up this morning. So here's something new to think about. As you noodle it and you want to talk more, let me know. I'm always here for it. It's a complicated issue and there's a lot that's really interesting out there. If you're looking for more resources, I showed a number of articles today. I have about 20 pulled up on my computer in different places. There's so much out there. If you Google Christian Passover Seders, you'll see so much content and so much debate. There's a lot of debate on this. It's a pretty interesting subject. If it happens to get you going, keep learning. Tonight is Women's Torah Study at 6:30 p.m. Everyone is welcome. If you aren't registered, you can register online or you can just use the link from the email that went out today in your daily docket email. We're going to study tonight. Less controversial subject, but wonderful nonetheless. Really looking forward to studying with everyone. So if there are women in your life who you think might want to study, if you're a woman, please come. And if there are women in your life who think might want to study Torah, please join us. It was really wonderful last time. It'll be just as wonderful, if not more this time. And a happy end to Passover, everyone. We have Shabbat services tomorrow night at 6 p.m. and then our festival morning service with Yisker Saturday morning at 10 a.m. So lots happening. Thanks for learning together today.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
You're welcome.